A warm welcome to the show. Every 2 years, the art world gathers in Venice for a celebration of visual arts and a competition for the prize of the best national pavilion. This year's event, however, has been somewhat overshadowed by politics, with protests over the participation of Russia and Israel. To discuss, I'm joined by my colleague Karolina Shapland, who has just returned from Venice. Hello and welcome. Delighted to have you with us.
Hello, Sally. I'm glad to be back in Warsaw.
So, you're back from Venice. The most important question, did you enjoy it and what struck you the most?
I did enjoy it hugely. It is an extraordinary event. I think the ambient is as important as the art. If you can imagine it, and it's called the Giardini. It's this beautiful garden on the edge of the Grand Canal with 29 national pavilions. And Poland, lucky for us, is part of that show. And each of these pavilions, some were built in 1930s, some even earlier. And in each of these pavilions, you would have the best of the contemporary art. Well, we say the best, maybe what the national curator thought represent each country the most.
Before we get to the art itself, let's talk about the controversy surrounding this year's Biennale. Russia and Israel participating. The jury has resigned several days prior to the opening of the preview week. So, will there still be a prize?
No, there will be no prize. So first, the jury resigned en masse, and it was an unprecedented move since 1968, during the student protest in Italy and all over the world. The jury resigned, and ever since, nothing like that ever happened. So the jury resigned, but there was still hope that there will be at least a prize for the best pavilion as voted by the people, by the visitors. But even this prize will not be awarded. And the situation is changing as we speak, because even though the jury did officially resign, it's only a couple of days ago that the national pavilions, or the curators and the artists, signed some sort of a memorandum saying they don't want the prize. So if anything, the situation is escalating day by day.
Right. So what about the other protests, aside from this jury resignation?
We filmed one of the protests by a famous feminist pop icon group, Pussy Riot, together with the Ukrainian group Femen. And what they did on a second day of the opening, they stormed the building where the chief president of the Biennale was supposed to be, in order to negotiate with him the closure of the Russian pavilion. Now, that was a bit of a symbolic gesture, because actually we do know that the Russian pavilion was never meant to be open for the general public. They opened the day before the official opening for the press on the 5th, and then they were meant to be open till the 9th, and then they were always meant to close down. So this was more of a symbolic gesture. However, of course, in their classic pink balaclavas, all the very angry ladies, because Pussy Riot is a feminist collective, were waiting outside of the office, shouting, trying to point out that art and Putin and the war are really not things that should be linked in one exhibition or even one sentence.
What about Israel?
So Israel, unlike Russia, decided not to open their pavilion. So the pavilion in the grounds of Giardini is closed shut. You can't even peer inside because there is some sort of a wrapping paper in the windows. So there are no protests outside of the pavilion. The only protests that we've encountered were pro-Palestinian protests in Venice. But there is Russia actually did the most outrageous thing, opening their pavilion, filling it with really questionable art. And if we can really take a pause on that, because I think it really tells you a lot that you need to understand about Russian culture. Because Russia was banned 2 years ago. It's a Biennale every 2 years. And now they kind of went back in through the back door. Now, Italian newspapers are speculating that the bribes were, the bribes change hands. And now, they have a pavilion, they open. And what's inside? Most atrocious contemporary art. I wouldn't even call it art. It's more like flower displays that, you know, you imagine some sort of a really fancy wedding, you have vases full of flowers, you have a DJ set, and I think that's really, again, important to say, alcohol is flowing freely. So the pavilion is full of Italians. It was very clear that other people are trying to stay away, full of Italians and full of Russian celebrities. When we went there for a couple of days, they were pretty obviously drunk. You know, it just goes without saying. Not just that, they kind of aware that they're not welcomed there, and yet they behave as if they own the space. So we've encountered this situation in front of a Russian pavilion. Somebody opened a huge banner saying so many miles till the front line, trying to point out that, you know, Russia is the aggressor, Russia is involved in the conflict. And one of the Russian female influencers walked on this banner saying, you know, Russia is responsible for this war, as if on a catwalk, you know, like completely brazen, just swinging her behind. It was just shocking. And I think that's what they do. They do this shocking tactic, and a lot of people just don't know how to handle it. Why the art was so bad. It was almost as a snub to the Biennale.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that events, festivals such as Venice Biennale, should be so deeply intertwined with politics?
Absolutely, absolutely. This day and age, and anyhow, you know, contemporary art, the clue's in the name. You have to have some sort of a response to the current political situation. So a lot of, I think it's worth saying that apart from the 29 pavilions, overall, there are 99 country pavilions. So many countries chose Palestinian artists or Palestinian-born artists to present in other countries. You can't avoid politics in contemporary art.
Mm-hmm. And now, on a more patriotic note, what about the Polish pavilion?
Well, I think it was an interesting curatorial choice. I think first we ought to feel very proud that we do have a pavilion. It was built in 1930s. It's really monumental. Sits right next to the Romanian pavilion. And the curator from the Zahenta National Gallery of Modern Art decided to put a video installation. Now, already, a bit of a debatable choice. I think in this day and age, we really value handiwork. We want to see sculptures, we want to see textiles. When you come into a pavilion and see a very slick video, you know, you kind of feel slightly cheated. And again, that video installation was very beautiful, very aesthetic, but almost too clean. You didn't feel the emotional response to contemporary art that you should have. So the concept, the installation was called Liquid Tongues, and it's all about the inability or the ability for people to communicate. That sounds, you know, very highfalutin. And what it was a choir of deaf people and hearing people underwater trying to communicate. And obviously, when you're underwater, deaf people have an advantage because they can still use the sign language. So it's a beautiful concept by Bogna Burska and Daniel Kotowski. Daniel Kotowski, the artist who is deaf himself, and he is not even a lip reader, he just used sign language. Beautiful concept, but I feel it was almost too clean, too intellectual. But, you know, who knows, maybe had there been a prize, Poland would have been awarded a prize, we shall never know.
So which pavilion was your favorite?
Hands down, I loved the Ukrainian installation. It was just so touching. Well, Ukrainian doesn't have their own pavilion in Giardini. What they did was they imported, they brought a beautiful concrete sculpture of an origami deer into the pavilion, and that origami sculpture is dangling on some sort of a crane on a big vehicle. And this crane in itself is really beautiful. in its own, especially because the bits of the concrete are peeling. So you feel there is something already there. You know, you feel that vulnerability. You feel that, you know, you think Ukraine, you think concrete vulnerability. But then you realize the story of the sculpture. And it's a concrete deer of Pokrovsk. And Pokrovsk is one of the cities under horrible siege all the time. And that deer was built in 2019 to replace a local sculpture or local installation, which was an old Soviet nuclear plane. So the residents of Pokrovsk decided to move away the plane, and they commissioned this beautiful, very whimsical deer. And as soon as the shelling of the Pokrovsk happened, the artist, Zhana Kadarova, asked could her deer be moved as well. Even though it was in a very historical sculpture, you know, they felt it's a sort of a gesture. And then for 2 years, the deer of Pokrovsk just moved on that big lorry across Europe, spending time in Vienna, in Paris, all over Europe, and then it was moved to Venice. So I thought, you know, it's a real touching story. I think that human element was missing from the Polish pavilion.
And the least favorite pavilion, aside from the Russian stand, of course?
Oh, there were many things that I felt, you know, what is the point? Where is the truth? Where is the beauty? Next to a Russian pavilion, I think it was a Danish pavilion. There was some sort of an installation with dolls in buckets. And again, you think, you know, what is the point?
And the story was not explained, it was just there.
To be honest, the whole experience is so overwhelming of the Giardini. You know, you run around, you try to get it all in. What you do get at the end of it is sort of a mishmash of art and style. There were some things that were so striking, like the famous, now famous or infamous, Austrian pavilion, with this amazing story of rogue, angry women collective that will take over the planet once the water will rise and we'll be covered underwater. And there was this amazing installation with a big concrete bell, and a woman, a real performer, was used as a swinging heart of the bell. And that's sort of a gestures you remember, but actually the more quieter stuff, I think you'd need more than, you know, a couple of days to really get it all in.
And what was the main takeaway for you as a visitor to the Biennale?
The theme of this year was, the title was In Minor Keys. It was a brainchild of the first African female curator to the Biennale, called Koyo Kuo. And she wanted this Biennale to whisper, to speak slowly about really important things in the times of politics.
Unfortunately, she passed away last
year. She did
right?
pass away. And I think that message of talking in a sort of a measured tone about art was completely gone. Because what people remember is a Björk DJ set or Brian Eno's music in the Vatican Pavilion. You know, we kind of are overstimulated with our TikToks and Instagram that it's very hard to remember those minor keys.
Karolina Shapland, thank you so very much for joining us here on Pulse of Culture.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
And thank you for watching Pulse of Culture. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.